Hello, this is Xiren and welcome to another edition of Know How Things Work. I'm going to piggyback off of the last episode, which was a 6.5 minute brief on Lyme disease. In this episode, I'm going to go much more in depth into my own story. So this is going to be a longer podcast, and the intention of it, basically, as soon as I recorded the previous episode, I was contacted by a number of people, and they brought up a great point, which is that they wanted to have me share my story. Now, the reason I want to share my story isn't, obviously, if you want to know what I've gone through, that's one thing, but more importantly for me, I'd like to share it with the hopes of that if some of you maybe have mystery symptoms or have been dealing with illnesses that your doctor can't quite peg down or think it's one thing, but they treat it and it's not making a difference, then this podcast may be for you, because hopefully if there are some of you out there, as the CDC says, they think that every year there are 300,000 to 500,000 cases that go undiagnosed, that go properly undiagnosed, because it's such a weird illness. Now, as I mentioned before in the last episode, there are about 3 different ways you can get Lyme disease that we know of. So for sure it comes in the form of insects, primarily through a tick bite. There seems to be evidence in people out there that have contracted it through sexual contact with someone that is infected. And then the third way you can get it is you can be born with it if your mother was pregnant with you while she was infected with Lyme. So it will carry over through the fetus. So there are a couple of ways that you can get it. Now in my case, I believe it was a bug bite. Most people do not remember being bit by a bug. Most people that have Lyme disease don't remember the bug bite. They didn't develop the classic rash, even if they do have the bug bite. All these kind of things that are sort of quote-unquote telltale, most people that have Lyme don't remember those things. They don't remember being bit. They don't remember the bullseye rash. They don't remember some of what's supposed to be the telltale thing. But again, keep in mind how this works. So the bacteria spreads through your body. It first goes into the places it can find that have very little oxygen, like your joints, right? So like in my case, what happened is I live in Huntington Beach, but I was touring with my band through Colorado. I was staying overnight in South Denver at a friend's house, and he backs up against national forest land. The only reason I remember the bug bite was because I woke up with a bug bite on my spine after sleeping at his house that night, and I couldn't sit comfortably back on the airplane ride back to Santa Ana. So that's the only reason I remember the bug bite, because I think mostly we get bug bites, they come and go, they're not a big deal. This one I remember because it was incredibly painful. Again, I don't remember developing any other bullseye rash, but again, it was on my spine, so I didn't get to observe that. Now, within about a month or two, and this is kind of classic Lyme, my joints started aching quite a bit. In fact, I was doing regular yoga, about 4 to 6 days a week of yoga, and I was getting weaker in yoga. And then my knees went very quickly after that. So within a month or two, I don't remember the exact timeline, but as I piece it back together, it was within just a couple of months that very suddenly, it was like my knees turned into what I called old man knees, and that was that I would need help picking myself up off the ground if I was sitting on the ground in Indian pose or any other kind of pose. Indian style. So I noticed that. I remember chalking it up to maybe this is what aging looks like. And then, of course, I sort of left it at that. Now, those were the early symptoms. Then what happens typically with Lyme disease is it can stay very dormant. It starts to propagate through your body. It starts to multiply and move through your blood supply into other areas. So it starts in some of the knee joints and things, which is why a lot of joint pain and some of that is reported early with Lyme. Then it moves into your brain, then it moves into your heart, and it moves into your liver, kidneys. I mean, it just goes everywhere inside your body. And that's usually, there's some kind of stressor that sort of indicates that it's now really taken firm hold of a lot of territory. In my case, the stressor was, and this is what I'm saying, people can have it dormant for decades sometimes. And then all of a sudden they're desperately ill, and it's almost like nothing, there was no indication of what happened, and that's why they, in my case, same thing. So I did a tour through Mexico City, which is 12,000 feet of elevation. It's like twice the elevation of Colorado, where I lived for 14 years. It's very, very high. And that was the end of a tour, kind of a rather exhausting trip through central Mexico. I was extremely tired. I was extremely broken down. My immune system was compromised. I was sick with bronchitis for like a month or something, some kind of lung issue. And that seemed to trigger the next phase. So the tinnitus in I basically had a small amount of ringing in my ears that had started maybe around the time I contracted Lyme. But it really, all of a sudden, it started just kind of going up in a noticeable way. And I even mentioned it to a few people that I needed to deal with it, something was going on. And then all of a sudden, December 11th, 2013, at 5:30 in the morning, I was awakened by an incredibly loud ringing in my right ear. I think it was my right ear, but it was 5:30 in the morning. I went to bed early that night because we were going to fly down to El Paso for some gigs.
Something good is going to happen, I promise. Really.
Okay.
You look nice.
Don't forget to take your pills.
You have a nice day.
That was really, in my mind, where it really took off into another gear. So the tinnitus, you know, I went to all the doctors. I went to the best neurologist or the best audiologists in Newport Beach, and which is one of the best ones in the country. And after hours of torturing you, they say they don't understand how tinnitus works, but of course I have it because of loud noises. I'm a musician, therefore, conclusion, you know, go take your licks. And they tell you right out of the bat, we have no idea how tinnitus works. They're the first ones to tell you. That's the first thing they tell you when you're all done, is they don't know how it works. But of course, I must have it because I'm a musician. Now, I've been babying my ears for years with really nice in-ear monitors, molded. You know, I listen at a very low volume when I'm on stage to my own voice and to the other things that are being sent to me in my in-ear monitors. I've been very, very careful not to be a, you know, tinnitus person. And there I am. I've got ringing in my ears. So they were all telling me that, but I knew something else was going on because, again, we hadn't done a lot of shows. I hadn't done a show the night before. It wasn't like I left a loud concert, my ears are ringing and they didn't stop. It came on in a dead sleep and woke me out of it. So from there I began investigating. I in fact insisted on an MRI, which revealed nothing out of the ordinary. There was also a sensation in my head, like a thickness, like a bowling ball was in there, some kind of, as if my head was sort of no longer light on my shoulders, but sort of had like earphones pressing in and a weight to it. That was all I could describe. So after that, other symptoms came on very quickly. My hands and feet, at the time, they turned orange. They're back to their normal color now after a lot of treatments, but they turned orange, which again was a mystery. Most people thought I was eating too many carrots, that kind of stuff. However, I had one general practitioner that gave me a course of antibiotics. Now, this is the first time I've ever had antibiotics in my life, or that I've directly taken antibiotics. If I've gotten them through food or whatever, that's not, you know, this is the first time I actually took antibiotics. I took a 10-day of amoxicillin, and the tinnitus started to decline. Like, it started to come down, and then it held. So about 7 days in, the tinnitus was about 50–60% reduced. And so the ringing in my ears had come down quite a bit. This was a big mystery. Nobody understood why. In hindsight, it makes perfect sense. Antibiotics at later stages of Lyme will not get to the depth that they need to. In fact, the Lyme will hide against the antibiotics. There's an enormous amount of evidence that shows that, you know, for the vast majority of people who have longer stage Lyme, where it's set in after the initial month, the first month of the bite, that the antibiotics won't get to it. However, it was helping a little bit, like sort of the low-hanging fruit of the bacteria were getting knocked off, and that was changing the ringing in my ears. Also, the Lyme tend to go into what's called cyst mode. So within under a minute, they can transform from a spirochete, which sort of looks like a long screw, very similar to syphilis, and it actually changes shape into cyst form, and from there it's impenetrable to changes in pH, changes in temperature, to adding in things like antibiotics. It's immune to it. However, when it does that, some of your symptoms also go away too. So a lot of people that take some antibiotics, they do experience some relief. Unfortunately, it's just a stalemate. It appears to be mostly a stalemate with the antibiotic. However, that was a helpful diagnostic tool. I was asking all the best audiologists, how come my tinnitus is coming down, yada yada. So now I have orange hands and feet, I have ringing in my ears. The ringing is very much moving, like it's going from one ear to the other the next day. It's changing pitch. I mean, none of this is conforming to typical tinnitus. It was very, very different. And again, everybody was saying, you're a musician, therefore, da-da-da-da-da, right? So people's first assumptions are these other things. Then my brain just started fogging up. This is a huge symptom. So for most people, that's what happens. Your brain fogs up. It gets very difficult to remember. It looks a lot like dementia or Alzheimer's, which many people that are older immediately just get that diagnosis. And as this quote that I played in my last video shows, this doctor in the movie Under Our Skin, which is a documentary about Lyme disease, says that he's never seen a patient with Alzheimer's that didn't test positive for the Borrelia. So here we are. I've got all these things going on, and I'm doing all kinds of medical tests. My doctor has absolutely no idea what, so he's thinking maybe it's a heavy metals issue. It was a number of years ago I had the mercury taken out from childhood fillings and replaced very carefully with porcelain. Anyway, when we tested, found out that I was toxic for mercury, I was toxic for aluminum, toxic for lead, toxic for cesium, just a number of things. And of course I was also toxic for the metal they inject into you during the MRI. So all of those things my body was holding on to. And again, some doctors said, well, we don't understand why, but some people don't have as easy a time flushing the heavy metals out and you test high. Well, it turns out, again, this is telltale Lyme. I don't operate heavy machinery, I don't work around auto repair shops, you know, I don't know where I would have contracted these things. I wasn't really in a place that I could understand where I was getting these from. But again, in hindsight, classic Lyme disease, heavy metals. Everybody with Lyme disease has heavy metals. These little guys, literally when they're in their cyst form, they store heavy metals. Like they hold on to them with their little cysts. So in fact, until you get rid of Lyme disease, pretty much you're stuck with the metals. Like the metals won't come out until you get rid of the Lyme. So again, hindsight, if the doctor had, if any of the 30 or more doctors that I'd gone to, or specialists or audiologists or technicians, if any one of them had known about Lyme disease, these would have been pretty telltale signs. One of the tests revealed that I had a huge amount of fungus, like candida, in my stomach. So again, this is telltale Lyme. Now, candida alone isn't Lyme. I mean, that a lot of people eat really crappy foods, but I did not. I eat a vegetarian diet, primarily vegetarian, even vegan for the most part. I don't have a lot of exposure to processed foods or carbohydrate, same, you know, all this kind of stuff. So didn't make sense why I was such a candidate for candida. But again, that was showing up on the test too. So we started treating with chelation for the heavy metals. We started, you know, trying to find out, treating for the candida. And again, all these other things are happening. Now I can't stay awake for more than a few hours at a time. It was chronic fatigue. So it was just a numbers, like one thing after another was stacking up. So I was foggy headed, my hands and feet were orange. I had this ringing in my ears that's moving around, insomnia. Then all of a sudden depression set in. If you know me, depression is pretty foreign. Depression is not my vibe. So it was a little bizarre being depressed and I was having horrible thoughts, like suicidal thoughts. Now I was also aware enough to know those weren't my thoughts. I don't have any reason to have those thoughts. I love my life. Anyway, so it was more like I was observing, going, oh man, something's going on. Something pretty hardcore is going on because I'm waking up into a world where I'm naturally joyful and I'm completely exhausted no matter how much sleep I get. I can't stay awake, I can't focus. So I literally had to quit. I had to quit all my projects. So I quit my music. I actually had other people stand in for one of my bands for about 3 months. It was a hard time. It's a very rough time. Now, along with all that, you're exhausted, but I was also had insomnia, so I couldn't even sleep for, I couldn't stay awake for very long, but I also couldn't sleep for very long, so I was kind of up and awake and asleep. So anyway, I got very hardcore into meditation, just tried to center myself, tried to focus myself. Now, you have to imagine at this point, everybody out there, I mean, I went from everybody from the best audiologists, I had incredible medical professionals working with me, everybody from osteopaths, I had chiropractors, acupuncturists. I wasn't just going to good doctors, I was going to people who had come to me personally through incredible recommendations, people that had experienced miraculous recoveries, and these were some of the best diagnosticians in all disciplines, from spiritual healers to straight up Western medicine sciences. And everybody was coming back with, oh, well, maybe you're just exhausted and you need to rest it off, or some version of obviously the tinnitus. You know, they would kind of focus on one symptom or another. So I tried to hide some of, like when I wanted to go get diagnosed, I had to hide the fact that I had tinnitus, because immediately any doctor would fixate on that. They'd get 2 and 2 together, you're a musician, tinnitus, blah, 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 get the head on, you know, get out of here, kid, you bother me kind of thing. This is very common. Lyme disease presents in many, in fact, most cases as some form of mental disorder. There are a huge amount of people that experience deep depression and then are put on antidepressant medications and all this other stuff. Many people end up with deeply depressed states. The Lyme disease, apparently what happens is the Lyme actually eat your serotonin inhibitors and put your body in a state of fight or flight. So as I was laying there trying to sleep a lot of the time, it was like every single tiny noise, and I live in downtown Huntington Beach, every single little tiny noise, a voice out on the street or a car alarm, and I would just, you know, it's like a shotgun had gone off, like the physiological reaction in my body. So there was some heightened sense, and what it turns out to be is that the Lyme do eat your serotonin inhibitors, which of course make you relatively miserable. It makes you very difficult to be happy. And then it puts your body in this fight or flight state. So again, I had telltale Lyme symptoms, but they were all missed because most doctors don't quite understand how to put them all together. Now, there was fortunately a very helpful doctor that we talked to up in the Pacific Northwest, and she was the one that suggested I get a Lyme test. So I went down. This was in April of last year. So in April of 2014, I got my first Lyme test. But the doctor that I was going to, so I went to a different doctor than the one that had suggested I look for Lyme. So he did what most doctors do, which is he put me on what's called like the standard blot test, the Western blot test. Those tests fail. Most of the time they fail, and I was, of course, another one of those that failed.
Dr. Spinagle says the spirochete that causes Lyme creates a biofilm around cells, masking its identity from the body's immune system.
So they test the patient. The antibody testing that's used by most physicians is negative. They say you don't have Lyme disease.
But he says that's wrong 60% of the time, all while patients like Sarah suffer for years from joint pain to neurological damage that causes anxiety, fatigue, even compulsive behavior.
So I got it back and it said I did not have Lyme disease. It was a false negative. So I went, you know, my doctor had insisted, he's like, you don't have Lyme disease. Now this other doctor's saying, man, it sure sounds like you have Lyme disease. So he forced me to take this kind of remedial, inexpensive, very quick test. You do, you know, it was like a couple days, you got a result back. The other doctor who had familiarity with it was suggesting that I take the test that I recommended in my last video, which is the best test we currently have in North America, and one of only about 3 reliable labs that do test for Lyme. Anyway, I didn't know any of that, so I took the bad test, I got a false negative, so I went on looking. I kept looking for stuff. Every other test came up that I was the spitting image of perfection. There's literally, that's the other part of Lyme. There was no test coming back that wasn't saying negative, 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 negative. Everything was negative. I had high heavy metals, I had a lot of fungus, and I couldn't stay awake, and I had chronic fatigue, but there was no test coming, there was no other test coming back saying that there was any other problem. So again, we were fixating on, was it maybe the metals? Was it maybe some kind of, you know, for the Candida, I was doing ozone therapy, which is where they take a few milliliters of your blood out, they put ozone into it, then they put it back into your body, so it's highly oxygenated. And none of these therapies were helping very much, but of course that was because we weren't dealing with the underlying issue. So finally, it was months and months later, and I really realized what most Lyme patients come to, no matter where you are in the country, which is the very unfortunate fact that you are kind of on your own. Like Western medical science, and in fact, acupuncturists, chiropractors, all these guys had failed. The very vast majority of every single person looking at me had failed to understand that what I had was Lyme disease. So, like I said, in fact, my doctor, I had to insist on bringing back that other test, since the one doctor who was familiar with it said, go Igenex. So I brought the Igenex test in. In fact, I ordered it myself. And to my doctor's chagrin, sure enough, a month later, I get the test back. I am positive, even by CDC standards, I am positive for Lyme. So this is what Lyme people realize, which is we are on our own. If you suspect you have Lyme, your doctor may not even believe that it's a real thing, but guess what? He can do the test just to shut you up. You can have him order it, or you can order it yourself, walk it in, and they will take the blood and send it off the proper way and get the results back. If you have an LLMD in your area, they are much more trained to look at these kind of things. But if you're going to any other kind of doctor and you have these mystery symptoms, or you over time have this aggregate of symptoms, you should probably look at Lyme disease. If anything that I'm saying sounds familiar in any way to you, then I would suggest that you do a Lyme test. Better safe than sorry. And the Igenex test isn't 100% foolproof, but it's the best that we've got right now, and it does a pretty good job of weeding that out. So, again, I have not yet conquered treatment. I don't want to, I'm speaking about all this stuff in the past tense. So just to give you a sense, this was about in 2012 that I got the tick bite. If that was the beginning of it, since again, I don't remember, I never saw the thing that bit me. I just remember this bite, and it was just a few months later that I had the knee and the muscle issues. That sort of is telling of the typical Lyme story of infection, of early infection, but I don't really know. I might have had it for years and years or something else, but this seems like the obvious story. So let's say that that was the case. So that was 2012. It wasn't until over a year later, where I got incredibly sick, that things started really ramping up and more symptoms started becoming obvious and tying in. Otherwise, I just would have been looking at, knee joints and tired and, fatigue and yoga classes, but here I was with all these other things setting in, depression and, the inability to sleep. Oh, and I left out, this is the most important one. I think this is telltale. I remember one of the other symptoms I noticed early on, and again, it was so bizarre to me, was that I was having these vibrations in my body. They were incredibly unsettling. They weren't like heart palpitations, although unfortunately I've had those as well. But they were more like little vibrations, very much akin to like if a pager was sewn inside my body cavity, like sort of where I thought my heart was, like kind of right in the middle of your chest where you think your heart is. That it just felt like somebody was paging it all night long, just intermittently, but on a regular schedule, like bzz, bzz. I had our house inspected. I literally thought I was being electrocuted. We had our house inspected. We had a guy come down from Los Angeles and literally look at everything in our house and see what was going on. And he found a couple of things that we were able to correct, but certainly no smoking gun. There was nothing that looked like, why was I having these sensations? Now, it turns out a humongous number of Lyme people have that same thing. And these aren't at all limited to where they started for me. Since then, they've spread down my arms, into my fingertips, into my head. They're everywhere, and I feel them quite a bit. Then there was even a time where I kept thinking I was feeling ghost earthquakes. I was like, honey, are we having an earthquake? And I would look up, if the chandelier isn't swinging, we're not having an earthquake, but I was certainly feeling one, and I could not distinguish if it was happening in my body or not. So, again, pretty bizarre symptoms. Every time I would Google search, like anything related to strange vibrations or, chest vibrations, internal vibrations, this kind of stuff, I would come up against forum after forum of people talking about that symptom and having no idea what the heck it was. Well, it turns out, once again, this is probably Lyme disease. This means that it has gone neurological. This means they are now messing with your nervous system. They have ramped their way into your nervous system and are messing with the levers and dials. So again, if you understand just a little bit about how Lyme works, you can realize why it's such a mystery, why it affects so many different things, why it can manifest as so many different symptoms. And of course, another key aspect of this is that many people have lots and lots of co-infections, which means that it could look like, you end up getting Epstein-Barr, multiple sclerosis, ALS, Parkinson's, some of these other things.
What we're now seeing is these ticks are containing multiple organisms. They're not just containing Borrelia burgdorferi, the organism that causes Lyme, but they're containing Ehrlichiosis, Babesia microti. It's a malaria-like organism. When you get Lyme and Ehrlichia and Babesia and Bartonella henselae, cat scratch fever, and Mycoplasma fermentans and viruses, the immune system gets overwhelmed.
Lyme sucks. If there's one quote, Lyme sucks. So if any of this rings true, I would highly encourage you to get that test. And the last thing I would just emphasize is I know for a fact, again, just if you have strange depression or strange neurological symptoms, Lyme people are crazy. Like, they're crazy. We are nuts. We are kind of nuts. And there are an enormous amount of people, like, it's just the way that it literally works into the brain. It starts messing with things. So if you have anything that sounds like this that has gone undiagnosed, or maybe you even just, you have enough different types of symptoms going on, probably they're all related to this. Again, this is a huge epidemic that is going undiagnosed. So I would certainly encourage anybody to move to a place of diagnosis. If your doctor insists you don't have it, get the Igenex test, get it done, take a look at it, and just know, and just rule it out. Because if you're trying to treat for anything that has been caused by the Lyme disease, you're not going to get to it. So until you get to the underlying Lyme disease. So I think that's all I want to say about that for now. That's my story. It's now May. It's the beginning of May 2015. I got the diagnosis finally in January of this year. So I went an entire year with the really exacerbated symptoms. I had to fold my business up last year. I wasn't making a lot of, if you're part of my music channel, you'll notice I only released like 2 songs last year as opposed to the normal half a dozen or more that I release, my own music videos and everything. My podcast, there were long delays between episodes of my podcast. Like, I've been talking about it a little bit in past tense, but I've got the diagnosis in January. It's now May, and I'm still treating, and it's a long road. But mostly what I wanted to convey is if you have these symptoms and you find out you have Lyme disease, you are not alone. You are not crazy. Most doctors want to tell you it's one thing, it's you're a musician, it's this thing, it's, or if you have depressive symptoms or other things, they want to tell you it's in your head. I'm here to tell you, you are not alone. It is not in your head. Let's get this figured out. And I will be talking about some other treatment and some sort of different things that I've done to get through this in future episodes as I myself get further down the line through it. So right now, that's where I want to leave it, is hopefully this has made some difference for you and given you a sense of what it can look like and the urgency for looking at Lyme as opposed to just being stuck in some of the other diagnoses that you have. So thanks again for listening and watching the show. I very much appreciate you. Go ahead and subscribe to this episode. And this show is listener supported. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into it. If you want to support the show, just buy some of the music you hear. I have it all on iTunes. You can also click below. There are links to set up a monthly donation of like $1 to $3 a month. All of this very much helps, and if you've gotten any benefit out of this, then I am so grateful for it. And we'll see you again next time on Know How Things Work. Thank you.